At Zacks Small Cap Research, and today I'm on the CEO Money Show with Tony DiTonno. He is the CEO of Tenax Therapeutics, and Tenax is developing the calcium sensitizer levosimendan for pulmonary hypertension, and they recently started enrolling a phase 2 trial. Tony, welcome to CEO Money.
Thank you, John. Thank you for having us today.
Oh, you're welcome. So you began as CEO in 2018, last year when the company was starting to launch its phase 2 trial for levosimendan, and you're previously on the board of directors. Tell us a little bit more about your background and what you hope to achieve over the next few years at Tenax.
Yeah, I have worked in big and small biopharma companies over the years. And along with my partner, Michael Jepson, who's the president and CFO of the company, our goal is to build a significant presence in the cardiopulmonary marketplace.
Okay. So you have a lead candidate called levosimendan, and you're pursuing an indication in pulmonary hypertension, and it's actually a specific type of pulmonary hypertension. It's for those with heart failure with preserved ejection fraction, which is called, just for everyone listening or watching, PH-HFpEF. And this drug is actually approved in Europe for a different indication. And you're working on getting it approved here in the United States. Can you share some history of the drug and what do you hope to achieve with the development project that you're working on?
Sure. So levosimendan is actually on the market in 60 countries around the world. It's mostly approved for acute decompensated heart failure. It has been used in over 1.5 million patients since its marketing initiation. And our goal is to enroll patients in this phase 2 trial that we designed and have a readout in early 2020.
Okay, that's just next year.
Just next year.
Yeah, exactly. So, one of the interesting things is how the drug works. It actually, based on my reading of your materials, has a triple mechanism of action. There's 3 different ways it actually can help with pulmonary hypertension. Can you describe those three approaches that it uses, or three components to its mechanism of action, and how it actually helps solve pulmonary hypertension?
Sure. So levosimendan, there's actually a poster that's behind me, which you can't see, but it is unique. It's a calcium sensitizer. And why that's important is it helps the heart muscle contract and relax more completely. It's also a vasodilator, which obviously opens the vessel and reduces pressure. And it does have a unique mode of action in the mitochondria, which helps in preventing ischemia. So it's a very unique mechanism of action.
Okay, thanks for that description. And you started a phase 2 trial, as I said in the intro, and I think it was in December when you launched it, and shortly after you enrolled your first patient. How's the trial for PH-HFpEF progressing so far this year?
We're pretty excited about our results so far. We've got about 10 of the leading academic institutions around the country that are now investigating the drug. We believe that we'll be able to complete the enrollment by the end of the year with data readout in early 20, and obviously have it analyzed as quickly as possible.
Okay, and if I remember correctly, there are about 36 individuals are going to be enrolled in the trial. Is that right?
It's a relatively short-term trial. It's a 6-week trial, 36 patients equally distributed between placebo and active.
Okay. And how is the trial designed? And then also, what are we trying to measure to show that it works?
So this trial is actually a state of the art in terms of not only what the academic community wants to see in trials like this, but also in terms of the FDA. The FDA calls this precision medicine. What we're doing is we're actually measuring hard hemodynamic endpoints. So we're measuring arterial pressures in the pulmonary circulation. We're measuring wedge pressures. This is all very complicated, but suffice it to say that these are specific hemodynamic endpoints that are much different than things like quality of life, which is obviously important and one of the secondary endpoints in the trial, or a patient's ability to walk 6 minutes, or how long they can walk in a period of 6 minutes. But it's a hard hemodynamic endpoint.
Okay. Okay. And what are some of the indications or some of the history of the drug that makes you think that it'll work well in this specific indication?
Well, there are any number of preclinical and clinical studies that have been performed in a variety of ways in different measures, measuring patients' heart class functionality, measuring pulmonary vascular resistance. So there's an enormous amount of data that is in the literature. There's almost 1,000. Actually, I think there's more than 1,000 clinical references to levosimendan in the PubMed database. So there's
Mm-hmm.
a very big volume of data that to suggest that this unique mechanism of action and the symptomatology that these patients present with are kind of hand in glove.
Okay. And I think we've been pretty technical in our discussion so far, and probably some of the viewers are wondering, what is the difference between regular hypertension, which probably everybody is familiar with, and pulmonary hypertension, which may be a little bit less familiar to people who are watching?
Yeah. So yeah, and that's another great question. So hypertension is essentially a measure of the pressure in your system when you put a blood pressure cuff on. Pulmonary hypertension is actually a measure of what's going on in the pulmonary arteries in between your heart and your lung. So very different measures of cardiac activity.
Mm-hmm. And I guess what are the symptoms? How do the symptoms differ between pulmonary hypertension and regular hypertension?
Well, one of the devastating things about hypertension is that in a lot of cases, there are no symptoms. It's a very silent disease. In pulmonary hypertension, patients are fatigued very easily, sometimes without any exertion at all, shortness of breath. There are very specific indicators aside from when physicians actually start to do diagnostic procedures, such as echocardiography series, or even more invasive series, such as right heart catheterizations.
Okay. And in part of our work doing research on the disease, it seems like there's no real cure for pulmonary hypertension for those with heart failure and preserved ejection fraction. So what and there's actually also some fairly complicated procedures to test for it. Can you explain how the test for evaluating whether or not it exists, how that is done? You mentioned in the for blood pressure you put a cuff on, which is pretty easy, pretty non-invasive, but I think this is a little bit different when you're trying to measure pulmonary hypertension.
It is. So essentially, a catheter is introduced through the jugular. The catheter is actually passed through the ventricles of the heart. It's extended into the lungs, into the pulmonary arteries, and the blood pressure that way. This is it's invasive, but it's also routine. Most patients with pulmonary hypertension of any kind, whether it's failure with preserved ejection fraction or reduced ejection fraction, patients pretty routinely have right heart catheterization, so physicians can monitor their status. And I might add that in HFpEF, which is what we're studying, the main here is that if we can reduce aggression and relieve pressure on the left side of the heart, what we're doing is we're reducing the backward flow or backward pressure into the right heart, because when patients get into right heart failure, it becomes a much more serious condition, and mortality, 5-year mortality goes up dramatically. So while this is not curative, it treated early and aggressively, it will prevent significant mortality in the future.
Okay. And, I think that there are no approved therapies right now for the HFpEF indication, the HFpEF part of pulmonary hypertension. I think there's some for some of the other groups out there. I think group 1, there are a few drugs for that. So I guess my question is, what are some of the other things that are currently used for that now, and how effective are they?
So most of the drugs that are approved, as you indicated, the World Health Organization segments pulmonary hypertension into 5 groups. Group 1, which is the only group, it's the smallest group, but it's the only group where any of these drugs have been shown effective and are approved by the FDA. By the way, the smallest segment of the marketplace generated over $5 billion in sales in 2016. The group that we're pursuing, Group 2, is the largest group with over 2.5 million patients. These patients are different, and the drugs are different in as much as pulmonary arterial hypertension, which is Group 1, basically handled with a vasodilator. All you're really doing is opening the vessel to reduce the pressure in the vessels. In the case of Group 2, these patients do have elevated arterial pressures, but they also have more complicated and more jargon, but they have elevated wedge pressures. And the levosimendan actually works on both sides of the equation, reducing wedge pressure and arterial pressure. None of the drugs that are approved for Group 1 have been shown to be effective in Group 2, so clearly there's something else going on in these patients other than vasoconstriction. So again, all of this leads to our optimism that the unique mechanism of action and the symptoms that these patients present with are hand in glove, and provides for our optimism for our phase 2 trial.
Yeah. I thought that was an important point you made about the three-way mechanism of action. It really addresses all the different components there. You brought up another point that I wanted to expand on a little bit, which is the market size. You said 2 to 2.5 million individuals, and that's a pretty large market. I think only a fraction of those individuals are actually diagnosed, just because it's difficult to take those measurements, and there's no direct treatment for it. But my question is, how much do you think you can penetrate that 2 to 2.5 million individuals with the treatment? I mean, is there a specific subpopulation there that would benefit a lot more than another part of it from levosimendan?
That's unknown at this point in time. We've only just started to enroll patients in our clinical trial. Right now, I would say that if there's any sort of demographic skew, the Group 2 patients do tend to be, they have comorbidities, so they're obese, they have high body mass index. There does seem to be a trend that suggests that women suffer from Group 2 HFpEF disproportionately than men. Mm-hmm. Hyperlipidemia, coronary artery disease. It's the epidemiology here is very difficult, as you described. A lot of people simply think they're just old and out of breath or overweight and don't seek treatment. But again, when you start with an N of 2.5 million patients, it obviously doesn't take a lot of patients that do present for treatment to wind up with a fairly significant commercial opportunity.
Yeah, it's pretty impressive. So levosimendan, as I mentioned before, it's approved in Europe for heart failure, I believe. and it's been used in millions of patients. I think it was approved in something like 1999 or 2000. So it's been almost 20 years when it's been available, and I think it's been used in from anywhere from 1 to 2 million people already. So we pretty much know the safety profile of the drug. Does that help? You think? Does that help get it approved? Assuming your data shows that it's it shows that it has good efficacy. Do you think that helps get it approved here when you finally go in front of the FDA?
Yeah, there's no question about it. When you have a safety database that includes 1.5 million patients, as we do with levosimendan, that obviously is going to be very important when we ultimately submit our new drug application to the FDA. But, there are other aspects to that as well. For instance, we obviously know an enormous amount about the manufacturing of levosimendan. There are, you know, thousands of batch records, quality records, correspondence with various regulatory um, agencies throughout the world. So there's no question that the database that exists, both in efficacy and safety, will be enormously helpful to us once we get to the point of filing with the FDA.
Okay, well that sounds very promising. So I guess at this point, I'm just wondering, what kind of milestones we see going forward. I mean, 2020 is a big year. We should probably see some readout from the phase 2 trial. What else should we expect over the next few years?
Well, obviously the most significant milestone that we're looking at will be the release of the phase 2 data, which we do expect to be in the early part of 2020. I suspect that as we move through enrollment and we start to get some preliminary look at the number of patients that respond to the drug, we do have a unique part of the entrance criteria, or the way the clinical trial is enrolled. Only patients who fit the inclusion criteria symptomatically and respond to an initial treatment with levosimendan are eligible to be randomized into the trial. So, my suspicion is when we get to 50% of patients enrolled, maybe we'll have some kind of an update without creating any expectation that might influence the clinical results from a equipoise standpoint. But clearly, over the next 6 to 9 months, the significant milestone or announcement will be the publication of the final results.
Okay, that's good news. And so, anything else about levosimendan, the trial, or Tenax that you think is important to discuss?
Well, I think in the short amount of time we've covered a lot of ground. I think the interesting thing about Tenax is that we have a very unique product in a significantly underserved marketplace. A short-term trial that's cost-effective, that will provide meaningful clinical and hopefully evaluation results in a short period of time. So hopefully a differentiated story from a lot of different aspects.
All right. Well, thank you, Tony. Really appreciate your time here today telling us about levosimendan and PH-HFpEF. Very educational. I also wanted to mention to the viewers that Zacks Small Cap Research has a research report discussing Tenax Therapeutics, and we go into detail into the markets that they're seeking to get approval for. This is John Vandermosten, also with Zacks Small Cap Research, Senior Biotech Analyst. Thank you for watching today.